We talk about setting the program objectives and framework. That's kind of what we talked about. Pick your framework, pick the security objectives you have for the type of plant you're building. And at that point, you kind of know what you need, but you really got to cross-check it with item number 2. And John?
Yeah. So I guess to set up the diagram a little bit first, one of the reasons we put this together, we've worked with a lot of companies, as Dave said early on, helping them either establish their OT cybersecurity program or to revamp it. Companies of a variety of different sizes and different sectors. And this is just kind of a summary of the best practices we've seen. And even though it is shown as a serial pathway, because it made a lot of sense to diagram it that way, the reality, of course, is it's not completely serial. I just want to make that that point up front. Some of these can happen in parallel. There's also a lot of iteration in this process that's not necessarily shown in the diagram, but generally speaking, this follows a certain workflow where, what are we trying to achieve? You set the objectives and the framework for that. Then you test to check to see where you're at. That's number 2, is determine your current risk profile. How much risk do we currently have, particularly from a cyber perspective? It all depends. It depends on a lot of things, but one of the most important things it depends on is what's the consequence of compromise, and what safeguards do you already have in place that can't be defeated by cyber? So even if you're operating a very hazardous facility, if you have a lot of safeguards, your OT security risk may actually be lower than another facility doing the same thing but doesn't have those cybersecurity, non-cyber safeguards in place. So understand your current risk. Number 3 is establish your target risk. A lot of times that's defined in a corporate risk matrix, but how much risk are you willing to tolerate, and what is tolerable and what is not? That's usually pretty well established in most companies, but usually has more to do with enterprise risk management or process safety risk management. But risk is risk, and certainly to the C-suite, I don't know that they care why a plant got shut down. A plant shutdown is bad. So whether it was a cyber event or a pipe that ruptured, it's bad, and it's still risk. So establish your target risk profile. Then we have develop governance. So in other words, decide where you want to be first before you start writing, and then start developing your governance. It doesn't mean that you have to write all your governance before you can move to step number 5 too. I want to make that point, but at least get started. Start developing your governance, at least frame it out. Start to develop different policies and standards. Now, best practice definitely that we've seen is to do a pilot. So for whatever you're typically not going to tackle everything at once, but you may decide, okay, we have 3 things we're really worried about. We want to improve our backups, we want to improve our asset inventory, and we want to improve network segmentation. That's 9 times out of 10, those are the top 3. If you're operating 50 plants around the world, don't try to do all of them at once. Put a pilot program in place, deploy the technology, make sure it works before you scale it, which is number 6, to go to full deployment. Number 7 is establish, run, and maintain practices. Again, you shouldn't really wait till you get to number 7 to start thinking about how you're going to operate and maintain this technology. But you certainly need to have it in place by the time you're done deploying, so that you can turn it over to operations that's going to manage and operate it. And then last is audit and continuously improve. So like Dave was saying, sometimes with projects and engineering type projects, people deploy and move on, but somebody does have to operate and maintain this. You need to audit to make sure that it's actually working and still being followed, and that you're continuously improving.
Absolutely. And John, one other thing, when you hit step 4, I think that's, you have a series of corporate governance, but depending on where you're building a plant, depending on the skills you have to support that plant, they may be very deep, or you may be in an area where folks are fresh to this. It's sort of new to them. You may need other things to add. You may need training and awareness to kick off as part of the project, because folks don't understand some of the basics or they've not been around it. So as you get through that process, you really need to kind of, when you develop that governance, you need to kind of take a step back and look at what you need,
There's a,
what you need, where you're building.
there's a lot that goes into bubble number 4.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there is.
including, like you said, training awareness. And I think that's where we go next, actually, is to start to dive down a little bit into bubble number 4.